Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Eastern and MST's virtual open day. My name is Sarah Michael. I'm the Eastern Director of the undergraduate education courses, and it's my pleasure today to introduce Jacqui Stock, who is going to be speaking on why Australia needs more teachers that love Jesus. For the last 16 years, Jacqui has been a secondary school teacher and leader at Mountain District Christian School and at Mount Evelyn Christian School. Jacqui has been actively involved in the Christian education national movement for over 10 years and is passionate about exploring faith and education. She also loves to learn and is over halfway through her Masters of Divinity Studies at MST. This is Jacqui's first year with us at Eastern, and we are delighted to have her on the team and sharing her passion and expertise in education and in sharing her faith in education. The need for teachers in Australia is ever growing as education in our nation continues to change. Jacqui will be speaking on the less often mentioned, but no less important and immense need for educators with a strong faith in Christ. During her talk, Jacqui will discuss how Christian teachers view their students and the impact this has on the purpose of education. This will be followed by a Q&A session afterwards, so please post your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we will discuss those questions after Jacqui's talk. Handing over to you now, Jacqui.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to MST and Eastern's inaugural virtual open day, and particularly to our webinar together on faith and education. I'm going to make the assumption that you are listening or watching this video if you're thinking about teaching, or you've already decided and now you're wondering what college to go to, or maybe you're a teacher who is interested in the topic. But it does make me wonder about what your stories are, and if we were in a room together, a real room together, I would find out a little bit more. How is it that you've come to want to pursue teaching? Is it something that you've always wanted to do? Do you enjoy working with children? Are you interested in a particular topic and you want to inspire other people to be interested in that topic too? Maybe you've got family or colleagues who have tapped you on the shoulder and said, you should consider teaching, you'd be good at it. Or maybe you've been homeschooling for these last couple of months and you've discovered your calling in life. Maybe not. I first thought about teaching as a career when I was little. Like most little kids, I just changed my mind as to what I wanted to be every week, depending on who was visiting us at school. So I wanted to be a policewoman, I wanted to be a zookeeper, owner of a chocolate factory. That was always a wish. A fire truck driver. I wasn't too keen on fires when I was little. I'm still not too keen on fires, but I was happy to drive the truck as long as I didn't go anywhere near the fires. But in grade 2 was when I decided that I would be a teacher when I grew up, and it's in interesting circumstances. I had a not so nice teacher in grade 2. She was very grumpy a lot of the time. I don't think she liked kids. And she used to pronounce my name Jacqueline, which I absolutely hated. And she also wouldn't let me wiggle. So I'm one of your classic kinesthetic learners who needs to wiggle all the time. I need to be on the move. But that got me into a lot of trouble when I was a little kid. So my mum taught me this move where you wrap your feet around the chair legs so that you're sort of locked in and you're not going to go anywhere. And so that was reasonably successful. But I decided that year that when I grew up, I was going to be a teacher. And I was going to be a nice teacher who loved my kids, and I would pronounce their names correctly, and I would let them wiggle if they needed to wiggle. And that's probably why I get along so well with Year 7 boys. And so giving this talk, sitting still, staring at a camera, it's a form of torture for me, and I can assure you all that I have wrapped my feet around the chair legs to stop myself from going wandering at any point. Because yeah, then it wouldn't work. Now, right from the outset, I need to, and Sarah alluded to this before, my history or my passion is Christian education, and apart from teaching rounds, I've only ever taught in Christian schools. So I don't really bring that expertise as a someone who has faith who is working in a non-Christian setting. But my passion is Christian education. I love to look at how we can glorify God in our schools, how we acknowledge that Christ is sovereign over all things, all of our subject areas, how we're looking at faith formation in our students. And yeah, not just in general, but also in the subjects the particular subjects that we teach. So what I have to say today, some of it will be applicable if you're interested in teaching in non-Christian schools, but a lot of it will be more applicable to Christian schooling. So there's two main things I want to look at, and that is, how do we as teachers who love Jesus view our students? How is that different? And what does that say about the purpose of education? So if we were in a room together, I would at this point hand out a piece of paper and a pen to all of you and ask you to draw a teacher. So I'm just going to share my screen at this point. So I want you to draw, we're going to have to do this virtually in honour of our virtual open day, but maybe draw a picture in your mind of a teacher. And I'm deliberately not giving you much information at this point. What do they look like? What are they doing? Where are they? Are they holding anything? Are they standing? Are they sitting? What are they doing? So I was a bit too quick on the old slide moving on thing, but this is what you might have had as a picture of a teacher. So invariably when I do this activity, I participated in this activity about 10 years ago, people draw, mostly females, even if they're male teachers. Often we picture teachers as female. They're usually standing. They usually have a pointing device, or they're pointing, which is really interesting. There's a desk, there's books, there's usually an apple and maybe a world globe. Occasionally there might be students in the picture, and if there are students, they're usually putting their hand up. So I wonder whether any of your pictures in your mind had any of those common characteristics, and why it is that we have this social collective imagination that that's what a teacher does. And I'm going to unpack that a little bit more. When I did this activity, I did have a teacher standing with a pointing device. It was a stick. I've never used a stick in my teaching. There were books and there was an apple. So there you go. I fell for the common picture as well. And if you Google teacher, you get, these are exactly the images that you get. So when I did teaching at my teaching degree, they talked about this idea of the Nuremberg funnel. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of the Nuremberg funnel. Comes out from the early 1900s. But it's this, so we're talking now metaphors and views of learners. It's this idea that the teacher has all the knowledge and the expertise, and that they are pouring the wisdom, their knowledge into the heads of the student. It's a great little picture there. There's similar metaphors that get across the same idea, like students are a blank slate and teachers are writing on the slate, writing their knowledge on the slate. There are piggy banks where the teachers are dropping coins of wisdom, students as piggy banks. And then you get the ones like students as trainable objects. And it doesn't sound nice, but it's like you're training a dog or an animal, and they're preconditioned to respond in certain ways, and we use reward and punishment to get them to do what we want them to do. So that's another way that people have viewed teaching and learning in the past, and maybe still do. There's also the idea of students that are wind-up toys, like the chattering teeth, where you wind them up, and then when it gets to the end of their schooling, you let them go, unleash them into the real world. And similar to that is the idea of the toolbox, where as teachers, we are giving them the tools that they need to succeed in life. And it's not until they leave school that they start to use them. You've also got those who think of students like a growing plant, that there's a series of stages in life that they go through, and often we will talk about a stage. That student is acting that way because it's a stage that they're going through. And then we think of students as cogs in a bigger system where they have to learn their part to play in the economic society, and they've all got their bit, and they are one cog in a bigger system. And then more lately, you'll hear of students being problem solvers and critical thinkers, because we don't know what the future will hold. And so we need our students to be able to, come up with solutions to whatever problems the future world has. So kind of training them to be agents of change in the future. So, yes, I found this picture the other day. I don't know if you saw this on the news, about a Dutch primary school teacher who was missing her students so much that she decided to knit them all as dolls, which is just gorgeous. And I thought that would make a really good picture for this particular slide, where we're looking at how God views our students. And obviously this applies to all of humanity. But when you look at our students, this is what God is thinking. They're the crown of his creation. We read that in the very first chapter of Genesis. They're God's image bearers. That's a huge one, and that's what I'm going to be talking about the most. Our students are bearing God's image. They are reflecting his creativity. They are reflecting his goodness. Each one was knitted together in their mother's womb. They are fallen. They are broken. Their image is marred, but it's not ruined. And that they're loved so much that Jesus died for them. And for me as a teacher, this is who I see when I look at my students. I don't see them as cogs in a wheel, and I also don't see them as only having relevance in the future. They are loved, they are precious, they are called by God, they are unique, and I get to reflect God's love to them and discover with them the unique ways that they are reflecting God. I was just reading the other day of a teacher who had written, "It changes everything when you view people and your students as God's image bearers. It changes how you deal with classroom discipline. It changes how you make decisions about curriculum. It changes the teacher's role. It even changes the very purpose of education," which we're going to look at in a few moments. I love the beginning of every school year, where you have 25 new students in your class, and you have the privilege of getting to know them and to love them and to find out the different ways that they reflect God's image. One particular year with my year sevens, I decided to do that old warm fuzzy activity where you write notes of encouragement to each other. And on this particular occasion, it was a bit of a flop. They wrote things like, "I like your hair." This is what they wrote to each other, not to me. "I like your hair," or "I like your shoes," or "You're on my bus," which is not really encouragement at all. And I realised that, firstly, they didn't know each other well enough to be able to do that activity anyway. But also our students need to be encouraged how to be an encouragement to each other, how to look out for those ways that they each reflect God's image. So I was really purposeful that year in calling out the ways that they were doing that. So I would say things like, "You have a heart for people that get overlooked," or "Your drawings are so intricate. You have an amazing attention to detail," or "I love the way that you listen carefully every time someone's talking. You listen with all of you." And what I noticed over the year was that at first they started saying similar things like that to each other. They were using the same phrases. But then they started doing it, they started coming up with their own, and you could tell they were starting to learn how to view each other and to look out specifically for the ways that their peers reflected God's image. It's one of those moments in your teaching that makes you feel all warm and fuzzy inside, and you get the sense that God's pretty chuffed too. So recognizing our students as image bearers is a really critical starting point. But what does this say about the purpose of education? So in an informal survey that was done by the Christian Teachers Journal in 2014, they asked students why they went to school, what was the purpose of education. And nearly every single student wrote that they were going to school to get the knowledge and skills they needed to get a job when they left, and to be successful. And we're quite familiar with that reason of schooling, with that purpose of schooling. But more and more Christian educators are thinking about education that is about living, not just making a living. Which reminds me that the senior school at the school I worked at last year had a motto of faithful learning, faithful living. It's not just about the knowledge and skills. As Christians, we are interested in how we are teaching our children to love and to glorify and to serve and to enjoy God and his creation. So this is where we start talking about formation of students. And formation is a bit of a buzzword in Christian education circles at the moment. Every school, whether they acknowledge it or not, are in the business of formation. When you drive past a school and see the big poster of a student who's got the highest data, that tells you something about what that school values, wants for its students. And when you read through the Australian curriculum and have a look at what the government wants our students to learn, that tells you what kind of people the government wants our students to be. That is formation. And formation also comes out in the subjects that we teach. For example, when we teach a language, if you have a look at the textbook for language, it is often assuming that you are on a holiday and you're asking for directions or buying coffee or taking transport or asking where the nearest hotel is. There is an implicit message that you learn a language so that you can go traveling and consume. There's a consumer mentality behind that. This is formation. We also tell our students that they should learn a language because that way they will have better future economic prospects. That is also formation. But what if instead we learnt a language so that we can listen to, learn from, and serve people from other cultures? What if it was more about loving our neighbours as ourselves? Arthur Frank Holmes was an author and professor from England into the 1900s, and this was an area of passion for him to look at faith and education. And he said, the question to ask about an education is not what can I do with it, but rather what is it doing to me as a person. And a critical thinker in this area is James Smith. In 2009, he wrote this really foundational book called Desiring the Kingdom. That's the top one. And it had a huge impact on Christian education around the world because, I'll tell you more about what he's going to say. I'll just tell you quickly that he wrote another version of the same ideas in about 2016, which is called You Are What You Love. So if you're interested in reading this book, and I highly recommend it, the top one, the Desiring the Kingdom, is more academic. The You Are What You Love is more accessible for the average reader. But Smith discusses that we, as a Western world, we have this tendency to look at our students as brains on sticks. There's another metaphor for you. Rene Descartes is famous for saying, I think, therefore I am. That idea that we are thinking things. Our bodies exist to carry around our heads, and it gives you that picture of those bobbleheads that you can buy where the head is disproportionate to the rest of the body. And if you have that view of a student, if you have an idea that students are just brains on sticks, then you will start teaching the Nuremberg funnel way, the idea that you're just depositing ideas and beliefs into their heads. And Smith writes, what if instead of starting from the assumption that human beings are thinking things, we started from the conviction that human beings are first and foremost lovers? What if you were defined not by what you know, but by what you desire? What if the centre and seat of the human person is found not in the heady regions of the intellect, but in the gut level regions of the heart? And again, education is not primarily a heady project concerned with information. Rather, education is most fundamentally a matter of formation, a task of shaping and creating a certain kind of people. What makes them a distinctive kind of people is what they love or desire, what they envision as the good life or the ideal picture of human flourishing. So as Christian educators, we're interested in our students being shaped by God. How can we encourage our students to align their loves and desires with God's loves and desires? How can we show them a vision of the good life, which is not about likes on Instagram or obsession with appearance or the accumulation of stuff, but it's about what God loves and seeking that biblical vision of shalom, the right relationship of everything with each other. So I'm actually going to tell you a few stories about how teachers have worked towards this idea of formation. And often teachers have done this by giving students the opportunity to meet real needs in the world. So a friend of mine from Canada is a teacher and a leader, and he was teaching a year 11 biology unit a few years ago. And he began the unit by taking the students down to the forest, and he read them a storybook. Can you picture year 11 students sitting on the forest floor having a picture book read to them? And it was a picture book called The Curious Garden by Peter Brown. And it's this beautiful story about a boy called Liam who lives in a very bleak and grey city. And he discovers on the abandoned railway track a little patch of a few little plants. And he starts becoming curious about how he can look after them and help them grow. So he starts nurturing these plants. And then over time, his plants start appearing around the city. And then other people in the city decide they're going to join in on it because they like the idea. And you can see in that final picture that at the end of the story, the whole city is transformed by these beautiful gardens. And so what he did is, before he had done that, he had thought, what is my deep hope for my students in this particular unit? And he wrote, my deep hope is that we would desire to become curious gardeners within this curious garden. My deep hope is that we could become co-creators with God in the restoration of the garden. And so what happened is that these guys went to the local hatchery and they learned all about salmon and how to look after the salmon. And they also learnt about the plants and the ecosystems, and they volunteered there for a number of weeks. And the beautiful thing was that even after the unit was finished, there were students that continued to volunteer there. This is one of the reflections of the students. I witnessed fry being released. I'm assuming fry a fish. I'm not a fish person. People planting trees, kids laughing, Mr. Hamming laughing, and of course, Mr. De Boer laughing. I witnessed classmates smiling the rest of the day after a visit to the hatchery. I watched the excitement on Mr. De Boer's face rise while teaching us. Not only has this class taught me about biology, it has taught me about people. Working alongside people who devote themselves to caring for the earth has given me hope that the earth will become a better place. I hope that I can continue to be a steward of creation, and hope that I can continue advocating for wildlife, and I hope that my advocacy will have an impact on how people view our curious garden. And other students wrote things about enjoying the forest more and it made them want to look for ways that they could care for God's earth. And yes, if my memory serves me correctly, there were a couple of students who ended up going into environment protection as their course of study after they left. So that's another beautiful story about the heart being changed. The head, they're getting the knowledge, but also they're having this heart change. And it's not just in our subjects that we're thinking about formation, but also in the regular practices as teachers. And Smith talks a lot about how we learn our loves by practicing and by habits and routines. And a different Canadian friend of mine was telling a story recently about one of his colleagues. He walked into her classroom towards the end of the day. She was literally in tears because she'd had enough of show and tell. She, as a school, they had been reflecting on formational practices, and she was crying because she realised that as a teacher for over 20 years and having show and tell in her classes, she had been inadvertently teaching the students that their value and their worth came from the latest remote control car or the Teddy. And she was devastated by the fact that this was a formational practice and that she was sending the wrong message. So she scrapped show and tell. And then a few months later, my colleague walked into her classroom again, and she had a big beaming face, and she said, show and tell is back. So they had been doing a unit on what does it mean to develop a heart for others. So she turned show and tell into an opportunity for students to tell stories about how their families were looking out for others, and with pictures, and it became a family affair as well. Another example of formation came out of a conference that I went to last year with my colleagues. We heard from Jefferson Bethke, who was talking about the various traditions that he and his wife had created in their house with their young children. And like Smith, he highlighted the formational power of liturgies and practices in helping children understand their identity and their purpose in God. So one of Jefferson's examples was a breakfast benediction, which his young family would declare every morning. And what my colleagues did from the conference, they adapted this prayer, and it became a morning routine in the primary school. And I'm going to read that prayer out to you. Can you imagine all the primary students in the school saying this every morning? I am a child of God. I have a strong heart and a strong mind. I am loved by God. It's who I am. No one can take it from me. It's not what I do. It's not what I have. It's not what people say about me. I don't have to worry. I can be calm and peaceful. I can feel safe. I can trust my friend Jesus and share his love with the world. And at one point, they read that out before their major production, and it was quite a poignant and powerful moment with all the parents and family watching on. So these stories of formation from teachers don't just happen by osmosis. They were designed by teachers who were thinking deeply about who they wanted the students to become. Nicholas Wolterstorff said, "It is nothing but a pious wish and a grossly unwarranted hope that students trained to be passive and non-creative in school will suddenly, upon graduation, actively contribute to the formation of Christian culture." And this is where it is really important that we have teachers who love Jesus and who are passionate about pursuing his wisdom and truth, and who are thinking deeply about what kind of formation is happening in their classrooms. My friend calls himself the Holy Spirit's wingman, because the Spirit is doing the formation and he puts himself in a support position. At the start of this talk, I told you about my grade 2 teacher who had a lasting influence on me. Teachers are influencers. And if you read chapter 3 of James, that's the chapter where he starts with the line about you should not all, rush out to be teachers. And then he goes and talks about the power of the tongue. And he talks about the rudder steering a massive ship, or the bits in the mouths of horses that help turn the animal. And in the words of Churchill and Peter Parker, with great power comes great responsibility. So it's with this great power to influence that we have as teachers, we need to remember to abide in the vine and make sure that that power is coming from Christ's power in us, and that he is producing his fruit through us. And that way we can see our students how God sees them, and we can hear what God wants to do in the formation of our students, and we can be the supportant person in that process. Because if we do it in our own strength, we are going to burn out, And we're going to become blind to the formational practices that might be normal in most schools, but are not of God. So as I hand back to Sarah for some Q&A, I've got two very easy tasks for you. I'm a school teacher, it's what I do. I want you to think about the virtual picture that you might have had at the start of this, and how that might change after what you've heard. If we were going to do that activity, what might you draw now as a teacher? And if we were in a room together, I would have given you an exit card. Once again, it's a teacher thing, where I would have gotten you to reflect on what is one thing that you've heard in this talk that you're going to keep chewing on for a while, and to feel free to write that down in the chat as well and share that with us. But for now, I'm going to hand back over to Sarah for some Q&A.
Thank you, Jacqui. That was fantastic. And I really hope it's challenging anyone listening who's thinking about teaching, but also anyone who is thinking, or who is a teacher practicing and thinking about how they might do teaching differently. But yeah, absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. Really inspiring. Jacqui, we have just a few questions here. First question is, how do I balance thinking about curriculum and standards and accountabilities with wanting to give quality time to formation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think the idea is that we start somewhere. We have so much to do as teachers that we could see this as something that we're just adding on. It's just another thing that we have to think about. But the idea is that you start small and you think, what is one practice, or what is one unit that I can think more intentionally about formational learning, and bring it before God and ask him, what is it that you would have in this particular situation? I think we get inspired sometimes by these things and we just want to change all of our units at once, and it's not practical. And so yeah, start small. Think of little ways that you can do it.
That's great. Thanks, Jacqui. And where would I, sorry, not so much where would I find time, you've kind of answered that one, but how is formational learning related to, say, maths or science or English? And how do I integrate it?
Yeah. So once again, in each of those cases, you're going to be thinking, when you've got a unit, you're going to give it time to think, how could I do this? With a subject like maths, people often think that it can't be done in maths. They'll say maths is maths. How can that be formational? If you think back to that example I gave with the textbook questions in language, we do the same thing in maths. We'll have textbook questions that are all about, when we're doing discounting, for example, we're all going shopping and we're buying stuff and we're trying to work out the discount. So we can think about the types of questions that we're having. Maths is a wonderful subject in terms of wonder, creating wonder and play with our students, and creativity. So there's plenty of patterns in the world where you just sit there and go, wow, God, you are so creative. I know this might sound a bit nerdy, but I teach Year 11 and 12 maths. And when we do quadratic equations and parabolas, it's just amazing that we can predict where a ball is going to land based on a mathematical model. So you look at differentiation and quadratics and you think, that is amazing. And it brings that wonder out. And maths is also another example in maths is that a lot of students will pin their identity to maths. Whether they're smart or dumb will be dependent on whether they can do maths or not. It's one of those subjects that really gets you to your identity and whether you're good at school or not. So that's another area where you can think about, well, how am I teaching these students that their identity doesn't come from whether they can do maths or not? Mm-hmm. And then of course you've got examples like measurement, where you actually could give your students an opportunity to create something where they're using maths as a tool, because that's what it is. And they could be using something to create and serve. They could be doing something for another year level. They could be creating something like a cubby houses or something that will make them think about, it will make them use the tools of maths, but it's also about service. So yeah, lots of ideas.
Great. So Jacqui, the story about the teacher so distressed about their show and tell. I can imagine that might make some either pre-service teachers, people planning to become teachers, or currently practicing teachers start thinking about what they do and whether it's formational, and perhaps it being slightly unnerving that maybe there's something that I'm doing that is formational and it's communicating something that I don't actually mean to communicate. So we've got a really good question here. Is it possible to have learning that is not formational?
Yeah, that is a really good question, and I think that we can tie ourselves in knots at this point if we're continually trying to find the hidden messages and everything. And that's not the idea. The idea is to be receptive to God and what He wants to form our students to be. So I probably would flip that question and say, let's not try and, all of learning is formational in some way. I do think that, but let's just be careful how we approach it.
Yeah, that's great. Look, thank you so much, Jacqui. It's been really fantastic listening to you talk, and your passion is so evident. It's wonderful. I think I wish I was a teacher in one of your classes, especially maths. Would have been great for me when I was at school. Thank you so much, Jacqui. We're going to close now. So I would like to thank everybody who's been listening, and thank you for following this webinar. I do hope that you've enjoyed it, and I really hope that you will stay and listen to some more of the webinars that are available this afternoon and into the evening. Do also go to the Open Day page and fill in the Connect form there. We would love to follow up and give you more updates on our events throughout the coming 6 months and next year, and just to connect with you. Also, if you have any questions regarding the courses at Eastern or at MST, there's also a live chat there and a team waiting to answer your questions. So please do take advantage of that as well. So I just wish you all a very wonderful afternoon and evening, and God bless you.